Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to the 2025 Year in Review. This time, you may notice that the background behind me is different, and I'm going to go over that and a few things that happened in life, as well as the books that I was reading at the time those things were happening. Well, I went to several concerts this year. I want to say, let's see, Good Kids, Caravan Palace, Friday Pilots Club, Mystery Skulls, and of Monsters and Men. So five, maybe six. I might be missing one in there. So throughout the year, I went to several concerts, which involved a lot of traveling to Denver. There was a lot of traveling in general. I went on a week-long road trip and a week-long. It was a 2 week long trip. About 2/3 of the time was spent on a road trip traveling back to Fairfax, Virginia, where my dad lives, and then going on a 4 day, 3 night canoeing trip on the Potomac River. And that was an incredibly fun trip. In April, I got another tattoo. I want to say it was late April, early May, I lost my last of my grandparents. Um, in July, I applied to a job, and by early August, I had heard back from them, and by late August, early September, I think it was actually the day I came off the water for the Potomac River trip I did with my dad, I got a message, an unofficial job offer from the place I'd applied to, and I have since accepted that job, moved up to a new city, and because of that, my background is a bit different. In addition to uh, all of that, I've been doing a lot of reading this year. I've been doing a lot of thinking this year. I've been doing a lot of doing and being this year. And so a lot has changed. As far as the reading challenge goes, on Goodreads, it does not differentiate between books you finish and books you did not finish. So there were two books I did not finish this year, one of which was Thinking Like a Mountain, the subtitle of that being Aldo Leopold and the Evolution of an Ecological Attitude Toward Deer, Wolves, and Forests. That one was too mechanical, too redundant. It was too scientific in ways that it really shouldn't have been. Um, Not to say that it was scientific in ways that it shouldn't have been. I didn't mind that part, though it was over my head for the most part. It was the redundancy that really got to me. There were so many sections that just went over the same graph that had already been discussed, or the same 2 years in Aldo Leopold's life that had been discussed. The other did not finish was a book I found at Coas Books. It is named Young Vandar, and I think in my Goodreads review of it, I basically posted that all of the issues I had with that book were ones that are handled in a lot of introductory series. In any first book of a series, it's going to go over the backstory, it's going to go over how the person came to be who they are, it's going to go over the world. But this one dragged on for so long. There was no plot, and it kept on talking about, oh, this prophecy, this prophecy, this prophecy. I don't care about that kind of stuff. I don't care about prophecy BS in my books. I don't like reading about people that are predestined to be these amazing heroes. And you see that a lot in the books I read. A lot of the Vlad Toltos books that I read this year, those Vlad Toltos books are about just a guy who survives in a criminal underworld, and that's really the only way he has been able to survive. But he also doesn't interact with the criminal elements as well as he could. He's a bit too good hearted. He does have a lot of skills and he does have a lot of connections, but he frequently loses his fights. In other books, such as the Black Company, which I read in the last couple of years, that's not, none of that involves a chosen one kind of thing. Everyone rises to a terrible occasion, but they do not start out really elevated. And obvious clarification on that, the first trilogy does involve a chosen one kind of thing, but it's not obvious who it is until the end of the first book. It's not obvious that she can actually become the figure that she needs to be until the end of the second book, and it's not until the duration of the third book that she really starts using that power. And even then, it's very hesitant because what she does is very difficult to use. She needs very good protection. So, there are books that I read that have that kind of thing, but they're better written than what I saw in Young Vandar. So, there's that. I finished Ann Leckie's Ancillary trilogy. I think it's technically the Imperial Raj trilogy is what it's called, but starting with Ancillary Justice, I then read Ancillary Sword and Ancillary Mercy. I think that the cover art for it portrays a world that isn't as representative of the book as I'd have liked, but it drew me in enough, the cover art, that I picked it up off the shelves, and then from there, the actual meat of the book kept me going. There were a couple other kinds of books I really liked. The Terraformers by Annalee Newitz. I think I put that back into the used book marketplace, partially because it was good, but not in a way that I like. And it was signed, and I usually hold on to those kinds of books, but the signature was indistinguishable from scribble, I don't recall if I've done a video on that book. I think I did before getting rid of it, but it is one of those that, it wasn't a highlight. Notorious Sorcerer is one I don't think I've done a video on, but was a pretty good book, and I have it on my shelves behind me. I think on that shelf up there, and it was a kind of Arabian Nights in vibe kind of story, but it does involve a kind of chosen one character, but is them failing the entire time. They fail upwards throughout the story, and that's the kind of chosen one story that I do actually enjoy reading. On Goodreads, I reread Terran Wanderer. I think I did actually do a video on that one, and I read that ages ago, but having reread it, I felt it was worth putting it in the Goodreads challenge. So with that third book as having been one I read a long time ago, maybe you can say I only read 43 out of 43 books, not 46 out of 43 books, and I might agree with you on that. I would say realistically, I read 44 books this year and enjoyed the hell out of them. Bloody Rose, I discussed, that was a highlight, and I still really love reading that book. When I need a healthy cry, when I want to see a book just hit me hard with emotion, Bloody Rose does that right near the middle. And I think that is one of the best passages in fantasy I've read in the last decade. I did also read Priest by Matt Colville. I have mentioned that, and I do want to find Thief. I want to find it organically on the bookshelves, having been printed out by someone else. I really liked the cover of that one at the end of 2023 when I found it, and then held on to it through 2024. Didn't read it until 2025. There were a couple other books that were just a bit weird. For the longest time, I had this book called Nickel Brickleby in the Heart of the Earthworks because knowing it was very, very young adult, it was also signed by a local author. It was at Coas Books, and I ended up reading it. I feel like if I were a kid, the same age that I had read Artemis Fowl and a couple other books like it, I still would not have read Nickel Brickleby throughout. It's just not a great book. It was too chosen one-y in a really dumb way. Sky's End I read this year. That was also young adult. I did actually like that one though. It was kind of young adult leaning into adult, but it was a very found family story that for part of it, and for some reasons, I liked a decision made by a character near the end. And I loved even more when they walked back on that decision because it showed that whole decision showed humility and a desire to make something of oneself. And in that sense, he wanted to do it and he still didn't want to associate himself with another character. That was consistent throughout his story, and him growing in showed he showed growth in the sense that he shrugged off his family because they had excommunicated him. Basically, they had he was no longer part of the family. So he showed some strength in going off on his own, but then showed more humility and growth coming back to the crew that he loved. And I think that was one of my favorite moments in a book I read this year. It was an interesting form of growth in a young adult novel. I did read other books that were more or less interesting. The Death Ray by T.H. Lane is the last of the books in the D&D Iconics line. I felt like that one was like a bad D&D novel. It did take place in a D&D setting. It did use a lot of the influences from Dungeons and Dragons, but it wasn't a good heroic fantasy novel. It was like a mystery, kind of fantasy noir-ish thing, but D&D isn't made to do that, and because of that, it just doesn't fit within the other books. I read Five Broken Blades partially because I didn't like the book A Broken Blade and figured 4 more Broken Blades might be more interesting. It was worse. Well, it was just as bad as A Broken Blade for various reasons, and they weren't all the same reason, but I'll talk about that eventually. May Corland was the author of Five Broken Blades. I read the other I read the sequel to um I read the sequel to Trail of Lightning this year, Storm of Locusts by Rebecca Roanhorse. I've got some of her original fantasy on the shelves back there. I haven't gotten around to reading them. I probably will this year though. There was a book I had bought in 2023 partially because of the name, and as much as I read that, it was just very disappointing. The Last Ranger was a book about kind of a mystery set on a national park. There was nothing last about it, and it was very mediocre in a lot of ways. Kind of glad I picked it up. I'll be happy to talk about that later and then put it back into the used book system. I read For the Wolf, and actually, I read a number of books during that road trip and canoeing trip. I thought I would have time on the river to pull out a book and do some reading, but as it turned out, for once I ended up bringing a book and I thought I would do some reading of it, but when there's 2 people in a tent and one of them is sleeping, it's not really good to have a book open and do some reading in that way. So there wasn't as much fun I had reading that way, and there wasn't much time to really open up a book. I was spending so much time talking with my dad, making memories, and having a really good time with him that, it wasn't worth it to be reading. But I will say I read Breach of Peace while driving across Texas from where I worked near White Sands to where I met the interstate in Texas. There were just miles and miles of open land where there was nothing to see. You weren't going to hit anything. There were no animals. So, open up a light book, flip through it in my second hand, keep, an eye on the road. Breach of Peace by Daniel B. Green was interesting. It was a quick read. I liked that. I ended up reading For the Wolf as well. That one, I sometimes like reimaginings of old fables and old fairy tales. For the Wolf was not the greatest, but it was an okay one. I did end up reading Dinotopia this year. I bought that signed, and I was so excited to have found it. Dinotopia, as I mentioned in that video, is a series that I hold near and dear to my heart. It's one of those series I read when I was a kid that I still hold on to. Lord of the Rings is like it. The Chronicles of Prydain are like it. Animorphs, I have copies of a lot of those books. I haven't talked about them yet. I would like to talk about them eventually, but I never really feel like I have the time to. There were a lot of short novels as well. Breach of Peace was one of them, but there was also a book. It was a modern fantasy, but in a 1940s, 1930s era. It was titled Even Though I Knew the End, and I really loved that book. It was a quick read, but it was also a predictable noir story, but the character writing is what made it really worth reading. The Lies of the Ajungo, I've talked about as well. That was a short book that I absolutely loved. The Dead Cattail Assassins, another novella, really good. I did end up picking up Spell Thief from a bookstore, from a used bookstore in Kentucky, I want to say it was, McKay's, with an apostrophe S. It's written by J. Powell, and it's lit fantasy, lit RPG that I'm just not. It's lit RPG. I'm not a fan of lit RPG, and this really cemented in my head why I don't like it. I did like it enough to read the second book, Ink Mage, and it was just. I mean, it's in the subtitle. Ink Mage, a deck building lit RPG adventure. It's too much of what it says it is, and not enough growing out of that foundation into something of its own. So I didn't like that all too much. I did read a book called The Time Roads. That was an interesting time travel story. I think it handled time travel better than most stories I've read that interact with it. Song of the Huntress was the last book I read this year. And Song of the Huntress it uses a lot of early English history. So when the Celts and the Saxons were still fighting for control and the Celts were gradually losing, and how the old bloodlines still had some power, and how the old magic and entities of the land were losing their grasp on power, and how they were struggling against everything else. So, Song of the Huntress was good. It wasn't great, and I'll have my own thoughts on that eventually. So, a lot of good books read this year, some not good books read, a couple bad books read, and everything in between. And all throughout that, I was doing a lot of living. I was moving, going to concerts. I was losing my last grandparent. I was dealing with a furlough. I was dealing with a lot throughout my life this year. I am a bit more optimistic. I'm in my aunt's place. She doesn't live here. She owns it, and I am living here and occupying the house. And I've been given a lot of free reign to move things around, pack boxes where I need to. My aunt is somewhat of a hoarder, and she has always had this idea she's going to come back to this town and move back in, but it's been a decade that she's been gone, and she has no apparent intention of leaving anytime soon. So I've been moving things around, making space. This room in particular was a mess about a month ago and is now cleaned, and really vibrant in ways that I love. This has been turned into a room I am going to enjoy being in. And then clearing up other rooms, I ended up getting a treadmill. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to this year, is getting back into jogging throughout the months of July and November. I just fell off between having a cracked heel that made it uncomfortable, to that long vacation, to the furlough where I didn't have access to the equipment that I usually did, or at least it would have been a waste of gas to go to work back and forth and back and forth. I didn't have income at the time, so spending money on gas was just money I didn't need to spend. So there was that, cracked heel, just health issues in general. So coming into the move in December, I've had so much time, so much stress, been using so much time moving, that it wasn't until around Christmas time that I had the opportunity to move in, to set up that treadmill, to get ready. And looking into 2026, I like this space I have. I like having all of my books in one room finally, and having that space for it, having a space that I can enjoy and control to a degree. I like having a situation where I don't have to pay rent, and that's honestly always a great opportunity. I like being in a new town with exciting new opportunities. There's a beer can candle making, like a beer can scented candle making thing I'm doing in early January. I paid $40 for a ticket, and I'm excited to go there. Maybe to meet new people, maybe to just enjoy doing something in a town I'm new to. There's game nights that I've been finding and enjoying for the last few weeks. There's all sorts of opportunities, multiple bookstores in this town, and I've got a long, you can kind of see it, I think there's two bookshelves over here of just things I have not read yet. A lot of books I have read, about half of one of these bookcases is just books I've read. But there's also a lot of books, even on this one, that I have read and have not read. Basically everything on this shelf here over, I haven't read. So there's Joe Abercrombie, um, some Chad Corey I haven't read. There's Kate Elliott, Keith Yatsuhashi, uh, N.S. Dolkart, Ed Greenwood, Book of Eberron short stories. There's a lot of books here I haven't gotten around to reading. There's a lot of books in general in this room I haven't gotten around to reading. And you are going to continue seeing used RPG books when I can find them over my shoulder, or over my shoulder. So that's Rifts RPG. I bought it at Coaz. It still has the price tag. They put it on so hard. I'm going to have to work to get the sticky part off of that. I don't like having the sticker on the book though, so that's going to change. You can also see over here Dinotopia and a Calvin and Hobbes book that I really love, and I think you can also see it up here as well. So there's a lot to look forward to in 2026 for myself that I am eager to get on with, and I am hoping that I can continue bringing this audience, for all 69 subscribers and however many more I get this year, or however many I lose this year. I'm not advertising this. I like the idea of a rant page on YouTube, somewhere where I can just vent my thoughts, put it out for others to hear, and then also never advertise it. So I am going to say, on my videos, you will never hear me say like, comment, subscribe, or anything like that. I don't want to have that kind of meta comments in my video. I want my video to continue being my unscripted thoughts about a book I read. There are still going to be break weeks. There are still going to be some uh, books that are part of a series that I've already discussed part of it and will continue to discuss the next installments in it. There are going to be anthologies that I will read. There are going to be short stories I read. There are going to be novels and novellas. There's going to be all sorts of stories, and there's going to be thoughts, a stream of consciousness flow of thoughts about it, and then how certain parts of my life have interacted with reading it, or certain aspects of my life that reading it reminds me of. You're going to keep on having that. There is going to be a bye week each month just because I don't want to outpace my reading pace. So if you enjoy this and have somehow stuck around through, I think at this point, 25 minutes of ranting, you know, please do stick around, and I will continue trying to bring you content that you may not necessarily enjoy or seek out, but content that you listen to and put on in the background. So, yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to the 2025 Year in Review.